Now the weather. It always makes the news. The Brits talk about it constantly, of course, probably because we've got the best climate in the world, accompanied by some of the worst weather. But of course, this year has been very, very dry, and for a couple of days, exceptionally warm. Screaming headlines that this is all because of climate change. Then I go to the Midwest of America. Floods, in which 29 died, and we're told that's because of climate change. We've got floods going on in Pakistan. A lot of people in desperate situation. That's climate change. The river in Wuhan is virtually dry. That's because of climate change. What you haven't heard is that we are now well into the hurricane season. You know, those tropical storms that originate in and around the Caribbean and often reach as far as Florida. So far, this is a 30-year low number of high winds and hurricanes that have taken place. Had we had a normal hurricane season, I've no doubt it would be all over the news, presented in apocalyptic terms. Well, I wonder why we treat weather like this. And Scott Duncan, meteorologist, is joining me. To start with, you know, normally there are a large number of storms that become hurricanes originating in the Caribbean every year, 14, 15 every year. So far, maybe one?
Well, we're just on to number two. So going back to 2013 is the last time we had such a low period of kind of tropical cyclone activity. And you could say 14, 15 on average over a season if you take a ballpark figure over a long-term trend, for example, over a kind of longer period. But in reality, it's a lot more complex than that. And you can't really say it's a clear call to make even before the hurricane season begins. This year, there's high expectations for overactive hurricane activity, and that's associated with La Nina. So this year is not just quiet, but it's also quiet during a year you'd expect even more. And obviously we've had quite a lot of interesting weather across the Northern Hemisphere this summer, which could be part of that, but certainly this is quite a...
So if we can't predict with accuracy, despite all the satellites you guys have got, if we can't predict with accuracy the hurricane season in 2022, how on earth can we say how much the climate's going to warm up over the next 50, 100 years?
Well, there's actually good talk about hurricanes and their frequency and the cyclones themselves and their projection and the climate models that actually run them. In the IPCC report, they say that there's not actually a clear trend in them. Maybe the dynamics are becoming more intense where they form, or there might be fewer of them, but the actual impacts might be changing, or they might be forming at slightly different times of the year. But if you, for example, a good analogy, you could have maybe 50 millimetres of rain throughout a whole summer. If it all falls in one day, there you go, you've got your 50 millimetres. You could say, well, there's your summer's worth of rain. But obviously that's very different to if you had 1 millimetre every day for 50 days.
But good news never ever makes the news. You know, we haven't heard that it's been an exceptionally quiet, calm season, that we've not had hurricanes ravaging islands or threatening Florida. We never hear good news, do we?
I do agree that, when you have news stories, you couldn't really write themselves if you come to, for example, there are fewer than average hurricanes this year. That's not exactly the same as we've had 5 Category 5 cyclones going straight into Florida.
No, I get that.
So even if
But I'm confused, Scott. You know, the meteorology industry believes the Earth is warming, and most people in that industry believe that it's carbon dioxide that's causing it. Rightly or wrongly, that's what they believe. So help me. Does climate change means we're going to be drier or wetter? Because it seems to me that argument is used whether it's drought or flood. Which is it?
It'll come down to where exactly you're referring to. So in like a tropical cycle, like a hurricane example, if you have fewer hurricanes hitting the same place, then maybe the rainfall in that one place becomes less. But in the hurricane itself, like going back to this analogy of 50 millimetres one day, you're more likely to drop like 2 metres of rain in a warmer climate. For every degree of warming, the atmosphere holds 7% more moisture. So when it's raining, it's more likely to pour, but it might not be always falling in the same place. So some things are actually harder to attribute to climate change, and I think windstorms like hurricanes are notoriously difficult. The trend isn't actually that clear.
Isn't the overall truth that actually we're not having more severe weather now than we've ever had throughout the last 50, 100, 200 years. We've always had devastating weather events. Nothing's really changed.
I think severe weather, people often think of things like windstorms, especially here in the UK. That's what we're famous for, really. And they're very difficult to say, well, is it getting windier? Are we getting these storms more frequently? And I would say I'm not quite sure. I've been looking at this for a lot. Yeah. I'm very interested in it. I've been interested for a very long time. But things like heat waves and droughts like that, we are seeing a tendency for these type of events to become worse or extend or become more intense and break thresholds more frequently. But I think a lot of people kind of fall down on what is actual severe weather.
Yeah, and an elephant walked across the Thames in the mini ice age, and the Romans made red wine up at Hadrian's Wall a couple of thousand years ago. Just very quickly, Scott, what's the weather like for the next few weeks?
Well, we've got quite a lot of stuff going on in the hurricane. Put me on the spot here. Got quite a bit of hurricanes going on in the Atlantic at the moment. We've got that Hurricane Danielle. It formed unusually far north, and that's what's quite unusual about this hurricane season. It's the most intense in terms of cyclone energy to form north of 38 degrees north. So quite an unusual one. The North Atlantic's super warm right now. So that's quite interesting, and actually could be related to why things have been quiet further south in the Gulf of Mexico, for example. But we've got a lot going on in the Atlantic. We've probably got to keep our eyes to the western shores and just keep a heads up for a bit more of these thunderstorms we've had over the last few days.
There we are. More thunderstorms. That's what Scott tells us we believe in. Thank you for that very interesting debate.